Welcome everyone to Talking Sense in Duluth. This is the final event that we've done over the last year. We've done 6 of them, so you guys are like our crowning jewel, and I can't say how happy I am to see so many people out tonight. We really appreciate seeing you. My name's Catherine Richert. I am the reporter with our Talking Sense project. I'm also based in our Rochester bureau. And I just want to point out before we get into it, just a few people you'll be seeing in the room. So there's myself from MPR. We have Maria Isley, who's our regional manager, who's checking you in. We have Dan Crocker, your local celebrity reporter at MPR here, over there. Our editor, Lorna Benson, is here. And of course, we have our ops team who will be recording everything tonight. So you'll be seeing us running around with microphones throughout the evening. So Talking Sense was started about a year ago, and it was created with this really basic premise, which is in spite of all of the issues that are dividing us for the last decade, but especially this election year, how do we continue to preserve the relationships that are most important to us? I covered politics for a long time, and then I covered the COVID-19 pandemic, and it became very clear to me that people were not able to talk to each other about a lot of things, and they were cutting ties with not just neighbors or colleagues, but like siblings, cousins, parents, and I thought that was pretty distressing. So we launched this reporting project, and we also decided to do something a little bit different, which was partner with Braver Angels to do what I think is more like a modeling exercise. Like, we're gonna report, but we're also gonna give our audience some skills to actually have these conversations. So it's been really wonderful to work with Braver Angels this last year. I want to acknowledge the fact that the election was barely a week ago, and my guess there are people in this room who are really happy with the results and people in this room who are very distressed by the results. And I think there's a lot of passion on both sides. So I just want to say, as you are talking this evening, just consider how someone else might be feeling who's sitting next to you, regardless of who they voted for. What I think is great about tonight's workshop is that we're going to focus a lot on skills and ideas to sort of help you get through these next few weeks and think down the future, how to move forward. So tonight's workshop is going to be led by Bill Doherty. He is the co-founder of Braver Angels, which has been working since 2016 to help people bridge the issues that divide them. He's a licensed family and marriage therapist, and he is a professor emeritus at the Family Social Science Department at the University of Minnesota. And we're so lucky to have such a strong Braver Angels presence in Minnesota, in large part because of Bill, lots of volunteers here, and a local chapter in Duluth as well. So Bill, come on up.
When you have to ask for applause at the beginning, you guys are a really stressed out group. You just lost your manners. I drove all the way up here, okay. Applaud one more time. Okay. Now, that was over the top, okay? So, well, It's interesting for me that one of the things that's important about my being here is that I am a therapist. Because I don't think I've ever done a presentation with a more stressed group. I kind of worked the room as people came in, and there's a lot of stress here that I want to acknowledge. And I also want to acknowledge that there are more people who are stressed about their side losing than there are people happy about their side winning. Okay, so there are more what we call blues than reds, but there are people who are reds and who may have voted for Donald Trump. There are also reds who did not vote for Donald Trump but are feeling lots of things as well. And Catherine said this earlier, so I want to acknowledge that there's some diversity of reactions, but also just to name that there are more of you who are trying to figure out how to navigate the world, your feelings on the world, now that Donald Trump is going to be the president again. It's a tricky time, and so I want to particularly appreciate anybody who is here who is a conservative, because people who win are usually out celebrating at a bar, not going to a talk about how do you manage stress. And I also want to say that this election like 2016 and 2020, but particularly this one, that the angst is deeper and would have been deeper either side. So if I think that if Harris had won, a lot of Trump supporters would have been very angry. They would have thought that the election was stolen and be really worked up. And so however this was going to turn out, there was going to be a lot of passionate feelings. And it makes me nostalgic for the days, when Bush and Gore ran against each other, or Clinton. So I'm old enough to remember like when Dwight Eisenhower and Adlai Stevenson ran against each other, and the country just like, okay, that's how that worked out. Better luck in 4 years. And those days are past us. I hope they return someday. But now, how much, the word existential was used so much. Okay, that's a pretty powerful word. People on both sides saying, if the other side wins, it'll be the end of our democracy. There will be no more presidential elections. People on both sides were saying that. Okay, and so that kind of fear is out there in our world. And I know a number of you who are on the blue or the more liberal side and who are very upset about Trump winning. I want to encourage you to recognize that there are stories like the one I'm going to start with, and that is I consult with physicians, and a woman went to her primary care doctor with terrible stomach pain, and there were no tests that showed anything was going on. And the physician said, is there any stressful things going on in your life? And she said that her son, who was in Nicaragua, volunteered in the Peace Corps, and a gay young man, 20 years old, that when he called home after the election, and the parents, his mother and father, said they had voted for Trump, he said, "You're no longer my parents. You're no longer my parents, you are dead to me." And of course, she had a tremendous emotional and physical reaction to that. So if you're suffering on one end, be aware that there's some people suffering on the other end, because when the relationships that we have get caught up in this divide, it's painful for everybody. So I want us to keep that spirit in mind as we do this. So the technology tonight is called a handout. This, for those of you who are young, this is pre-PowerPoint, a pre-overhead projector, but I have found that this never fails. So somebody said, "Is everything going to be on that screen?" And I said, "No, everything is right here." So it never fails me, and so this will be something for you to take home to remember some of the points we made. And the first part is going to be about how we handle our, oh yeah, good. If you don't have a hand out, feel free to raise your hand and get one. So we got some hands over here, yep. I won't shame you about how you walked past the handouts. They were there at the beginning, and that the smart people here all pick one up. I will not do that. I will not shame anybody. So the first part is going to be about how we handle our emotions, how we emotionally deal with stress at this point. And then the next part of it, and the bulk of it, will be about how we manage our relationships. So the first part, managing strong emotions after the election. And a lot of this comes out of standard, psychotherapy 101, starting with accept your feelings, positive, negative, mixed, or numb. It doesn't do any good to say, I don't feel this way, when you do. So just accept it. Don't be a super critic of your feelings. This is how you're feeling. And I bet if we went around the room, which we won't do, there'd be a wide range of reactions of how people felt the morning or the afternoon of November 6th. Everything from outrage to panic to at peace, or stay the course, to happy, to overwhelmingly pleased. So wide range. So accepting those. And then the second part of it is question your assumptions and beliefs that are connected to very strong feelings. And again, this is sort of cognitive behavioral therapy 101. So the client says, nobody loves me. I feel like nobody loves me in this world. So the therapist says, oh, that's hard, and you're feeling that way. And then, nobody? Your mama? Well, she loves me, but she has to. Okay. And so then you start to say, what happens to some other folks? And so when we have feelings that are very powerful, they're often connected to thoughts that are least worth questioning. And so if you are blue, more liberal, and you were feeling, are feeling, we're feeling, this is the end of our democracy forever. Now, I don't know the future. Maybe you're right, but it's at least worth questioning whether that's right, or whether that's accurate, or whether it's worth building a powerful response to. So questioning. And the same thing about people who are euphoric. I've been around for enough elections to know that passes. I mean, just think about elections that you've been thrilled with, and then reality hits. In fact, elections are like a wedding day. And then there is marriage. I'm happily married. My wife is here. This is not personal. But there's what I see, we get into this sort of bipolar thing that every 2 years, and one could reasonably predict euphoria, and then, all of these elections in the past were 2 years after the presidential election, that party gets swept out of power, and so, so it's worth suggesting, questioning assumptions that you may have that are connected to strong negative feelings. It doesn't mean they're wrong, and the worst could always happen, but there isn't necessarily an outside validity to the strong feelings we have. Next is to recognize, this is what I was just saying, recognize your feelings may change over time. We hardly ever feel as miserable or as happy for long stretches of time. So those of you who have experienced acute grief over a loss, at the moment you could think, my life I will never laugh again, I will never be joyful again, and chances are you will be. And so it's stepping back. What I'm suggesting is having the feelings and then stepping outside of them, and this one is the idea that I will be feeling differently, no doubt, in some ways, in 2 months or 2 years. And to avoid then avoid doing anything you can't reverse while you're feeling this strongly. And in family life, some things you can't reverse. There's this young man saying, you're no longer my parents. Now, he can go back and recover, but they will never get over that shock. Okay? I had people who, after the 2016 election, when Trump was elected the first time, sold all of their stocks and have had to work additional years in retirement because they had convinced themselves that the stock market was going to crash when that guy got in. And what happened was the stock market took off. Stock markets are usually quite independent of who's in the White House. And the consequence was, they're an upper middle class family, but having to work a couple of years beyond when you hope to retire because you lost that much money because you did something that was based on that powerful feeling. I would say similar thing with boycotting a Thanksgiving dinner because your relatives voted the other way. That will be always remembered in the family as the Thanksgiving that cousin Bob boycotted. Now, you might be saying that you did it as a conscientious objector or whatever, but it's boycotted. Same way, like when people boycott funerals and weddings, people don't forget that. People don't forget that. So I'm not saying don't do it, and we're going to talk later about what's all involved in that, but I'm suggesting in the presence of strong feelings, it's probably not a good idea to cut off a relationship that you've had for some time, to quit a job, to sell all your 401k or whatever, because chances are your feelings are not permanent. Next thing around emotional coping is that I strongly recommend, if you're feeling worked up, to stay away from social media, which is an engine of outrage. Engine of outrage. This is the money that comes from outrage. And you might want to consider going on a diet of your favorite TV shows, your news shows. What's that? Yeah, binge watching instead of binge watching. I don't know what the opposite. So that's why I said go on a diet, perhaps, because some of this is sort of self-protection. I've heard a number of people I've worked with in therapy, but also I was talking to some people here tonight. Is if you know you're in a very distressed emotional state, it's a good idea to avoid things, to exposure to things that are going to just feed that, without giving you any other coping skills. And there's something, then in terms of relationships, there's something called emotional contagion. If you surround yourself with people who ratchet each other up, and you don't want to ratchet up, so I'm not giving prescriptions here, I'm saying if you don't want to just keep going down or keep going outrage, or if you're a conservative and you want to not just try to live with euphoria as long as possible, because the outrage will be coming when somebody's not accepted by the Senate for a nomination, right? And then that'll be the beginning of the fall from, right? And then you can just say, well, they're out after my guy. All of that, all the outrage machine, and the conflict entrepreneurs, Amanda Ripley has written about this, you coined that term, conflict entrepreneurs, people who make their living at getting you and me worked up, feeding us more and more, often not accurate, not true, examples of how people on the other side are beyond the pale, beyond the pale. And so you might want to consider not exposing yourself to those folks, and also, to not cut off friendships in any way, but if you have friends who every time you talk, you feel worse, you might want to talk about the Vikings. Well, that you could feel worse then too, I guess. I have to pick another example. Actually, Minnesota, we're always expecting the worst from our teams, so and then it happens usually. So I just violated every norm I just talked about here, didn't I? But I can't hope too much. I can't allow myself to hope. So talk to me afterwards and help me with it. I'm doing okay about the election, but not the Vikings, I'm afraid. Timberwolves are losing 3 in a row. It's just hard. It's hard for me. I'll just break into small groups now, and I'll get myself back. Okay, so now I want to move into the interpersonal, because, we're adults in this room. Many of us have faced individual hard times in our lives. Most of us are pretty resilient, and we move on. Okay? And these are some tips to help maybe move on a little faster in terms of our emotional equilibrium. The bigger threat to me is the interpersonal one. The interpersonal one, because extended families and friendship circles that go back to elementary school, and some work settings, not all, are places of political diversity. In fact, extended families, you don't get to choose your cousins and your in-laws, right? And so you go out far enough, and you have people who think and vote very differently than you do. And some of them are close in. There is risk of damage and regrets in those relationships. And that'll be the focus of the rest of what I talk about. So the first is to avoid, well, I'll say it more positive, to separate your negative feelings about political leaders and political parties from the people in your life who vote for those leaders who are in those parties. The term we use in therapy world is displace. Don't displace anger, frustration with a political leader on this person in your life who is not that person. Because I think some of this is that people get so angry and frustrated with, let's say in this case, Biden and Harris and Trump, and they can't get to those people, but they can get to Uncle George, they can get to Cousin Jessica, who for that moment stands in for that person that we have such dislike and disdain for. And we can't get to them, but we can get to this person, and that's a displacement. That's a displacement of feelings we have elsewhere onto somebody in our life. And so it's a good mantra to say, tell you, to remind yourself, this person in your world is not Harris, is not Trump, is not the Democratic Party, is not the New York Times, not Fox News, is none of those people. Even if you think they're getting ideas from those, they are not them. And it's up to me to protect my relationship from acting out my frustration and my hostility, which clearly, sadly, that young man who I talked about who said to his parents, "You're no longer my parents," at that moment, they were the first people he knew, and he felt betrayed. So that word betrayal happens a lot in very close relationships. And what I like to say is, if I feel betrayed by how you voted, that's my problem. Because you don't owe me your vote. You don't owe me that, okay? That's my issue to deal with. And that ties into, I'm going to go to point 4 and then back up to point 3. To avoid expecting others in your life to think and feel like you. So the family therapy language for this is, can I self-regulate emotionally in the presence of loved ones who differ from me in some fundamental ways? It may be certain values, it may be how they vote politically, it may be religiously. Can I be okay? Can I have emotional equilibrium now, knowing that you voted differently? And what I'm saying is, and this may sound hard, if I am emotionally dysregulated by how you voted, that's on me. That's my issue. That's my issue. Because you don't owe me that. You didn't betray me. It's my issue. This is called, in family therapy language, differentiation of self. How can I tolerate difference in an important relationship? And the closer the relationship, the harder this is, without it being on me. So what parents, I was talking to a parent the other day who is very upset about Trump getting elected, and she was struggling with the fact that her 20-year-old son voted for Trump. And so feeling like she failed. And then getting really worked up about that. and then challenging him about that. But what she's challenging is her own sense of failure, her own distress. When she pulled back from it, she realized he's a young man, he's finding his way in the world, and this is where he is now. Okay? He's always been a good person. He's a good person now. And you may think, his mother may think, that was a really poor choice of an election. But the distress that she had, the distress is hers to deal with, I'm saying, not his. Is that making sense? That is a huge, because we can't change somebody's views. We can't change their feelings. And a lot of conflict in family life in general, but certainly around elections and political differences, this polarization, is about, I need you to change in order for me to feel good. And family members, if they sense that, no way. No way. It's like trying to get a family member to go to the friggin' doctor. Some people would rather die than give in to their sibling who keeps nagging them. I'm sure you have a brain tumor, blah, blah, blah. Right? And so it creates this, what we call reactance, psychological reactance, that we don't want to lose our autonomy. And so somebody who's coming across to me and by the way, this doesn't have to be just with anger. It can be with patronizing. So Debbie, let me kind of explain stuff to you. Okay? And I know you voted for him because you're white and privileged. Okay? And so let me explain these terms to you. You want to wring my neck. I can see a look in her face right now. Okay? And this is hard, but I'm going to speak slowly. I call this, by the way, bluesplaining, like mansplaining. So I know you're struggling with the notion of white privilege, so let me slow it down. You've heard of slavery. Good, we've started. And then Jim Crow, and then the worst is when you say, I still don't buy it. I say, well, that's your privilege saying that. And then people get really, so can you see what I mean? That is playing nice while basically not accepting somebody. And internally, it's you need to change so that I feel okay. Because I'm having trouble tolerating the fact that you're different. Now, that doesn't mean we accept everything from our loved ones, because if my loved one is coming on strong to me about their views, if you're trying to talk me out of any notion of white privilege because you think it's horsepucky and you're coming at me on this and you're saying you heard that this was on MSNBC or whatever, well, now we have a problem because you're pushing into my boundaries. You're trying to change me. And I have to deal with that with you. So I have to set some limits, I have to push back, I have some boundaries, okay? That's a conflict. That is a genuine conflict because somebody is trying to get me to change and suggesting that I'm ignorant. That's an interpersonal conflict that we need skills for managing, but it's not based on the fact that you think differently. It's how you're treating me. Does that make sense? How you're treating me is where the conflict can come in a healthy way, and we try to deal with it. In some of our Brave Angels workshops, we talk about skills for difficult moments, okay? And exit strategies. How do you get out of a conversation where somebody is coming on strong with you? If you want to ask about that in the Q&A, we can do that. But I'm making the distinction between stress and conflict because you are different, even if I am appalled by your differences, even if I am appalled of how you voted or what you think, okay? It's not for me to tell you have to change and to get emotionally dysregulated. There's a a video we show we have a Families in Politics workshop in Brave Angels, and it opens with a video of a young woman saying, I can accept that there are people in this world who voted for Donald Trump, but my family, just like, whoa. And then it shows her and her mother going at it. But and now the mother does the same thing, it turns out, because the mother and daughter live on different coasts, West Coast. The mother calls and says, "Did you hear about what Harris just said?" So the mother plants these little things, and then her daughter goes, "Rawr," okay? And so both had a side in that, but because both of them are having that experience. And the mother says that all of the rest of her children are conservatives. And this one, well, I don't have to fill it in. Okay? And so when I actually had a chance to meet this couple, this pair, I was urging them to give up the quest. To give up the quest that for her, that her daughter was going to come around and that the family was going to have at Thanksgiving dinner everyone thinking similarly without the tension of somebody, give it up. Okay? The daughter was also not of the same religion as the family. Okay? So you can see that these can become something that just is there and there and there, and that creates this unnecessary conflict. But I'll repeat one more time that you have the right to your views, and I'm not going to try to change them. I mean, I'll talk with you, share mine. Okay, maybe you'll change your mind. But I'm not going to get emotionally upset about your views. But I will get emotionally upset if every time I'm around you, you're lecturing me and trying to straighten me out. Then I'm going to be upset with you. Okay? And then I have to execute some skills. But here's what happens is when you do that to me, I'll do it to you. Okay? Boom. And so the trick is to know if somebody's coming on strong to you, you exercise some boundaries. We can talk about what those skills might be. But don't invade their boundary. Don't invade their boundary. Because then you're adding to the unhealthiness. Okay, does this make any sense? Does anybody have a question about anything I've said so far? We're going to have an extended Q&A later, but I just wanted to stop and make sure we're connecting. There's another form of conflict that's occurring among people who are on the same side politically. So we forget the radio on this. So what do you think I'm talking about? Two people who voted for Harris, let's say. They voted for Harris. They're both appalled at Donald Trump. And they're in conflict. They have trouble talking about politics. What do you think that might come from?
Blaming different reasons why it happened.
Yeah, they can argue about different reasons. Yeah. Yep.
One person is more emotionally invested in continuing the conflict, and the other person is wanting to put it on the side and see what happens.
Yes, so we're talking about different emotional, I'll summarize this, different emotional stances towards the same facts. I mean, Trump is in there, he said this is what he wants to do, or again, if it was a lot, by the way, a lot of Reds when Obama came in, they were having a similar kind of conflict. A lot of people were very scared of him, and some were saying, let's but it happens, and that was worked up. So this can go both sides. But with this election and Trump, it's just some of its personality. There are minimizers and maximizers in this world. And some of that is personality. And so some folks are responding to this to say, we will see what happens. I'm not going to get myself worked up. I don't want to talk about it all the time. and the other person is agitated, and their way of coping is to talk. And the other person's way, even if they actually are also equally worried, they don't want to talk about it. Okay? And they get in arguments about that. They get in arguments about whether to talk, and they get in arguments about the specifics. So one person says, so again, I'll give the blue example here. Trump is going to suspend the Constitution and get away with it, and then he'll try to stay in power until the day he dies. And the other goes, I don't think so. I think there are guards. I think that I don't, blah, 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 blah. And then, really, you think that? And so then they start to fight about who has the more dire predictions. And in fact, one of the reasons you might consider avoiding groups, because whoever has the most catastrophic ideas will take over the group. Okay? And then the other people you look like you're Pollyanna, if you think there will be actually another election. But in close relationships, people can really struggle about this. Now, I have to confess, my wife is here, and she would tell you, which she's not going to get the microphone, that it can be difficult to be married to a braver angel. Because I'm always doing this, well, there's this side and there's that side, and, because I've been immersed in the red-blue thing for 7 years. In Braver Angels, the leadership is all half red, half blue. And so I'm continually interacting for the common good of the world with people who think very differently than I do and vote differently. And I've figured that out. I mean, not entirely, but, so my mind is always going, well, there's this other possibility, this other perspective. This can be difficult if you want to vent. Yes, and so we struggle with that even though we're on the same political side. Okay? And what I'd like to suggest is, talk to me later, I have no idea how to handle it. It's the same principle, accepting that somebody has stronger fears, more confident predictions, whatever, that somebody, or that somebody needs to talk about it more, right? All of this is normal, and we're just a little bit mismatched. And so can we accept each other's coping styles and not communicate there's something wrong with you? There's something wrong with you for wanting to vent sometimes. There's something wrong with you for always doing the both and blah, blah, blah. Nothing wrong, but the match isn't there. So how do you accommodate that? And that's what certainly marriage and family life are all about, and even good friendships, is how do we accommodate to our styles without sending the message, you're doing wrong by this. You're wrong. It's sort of, it's kind of like medical news that's scary. Some people want to visualize the worst outcome and then say, how am I going to cope with that? And then they're married or they're good friends or cousins or brothers, sisters with somebody who will face it when it comes. And there's not gonna deal with it now, right? And so that's what happens around this. So the principles we're talking about tonight apply within relationships where people more or less are on the same side. And again, to repeat it, it's accepting somebody's way of seeing the world, that is their way, and their way of coping with the world, as long as they're not telling you you have to see it or cope their way. If they tell you that, you have to push back. You have to push back. But otherwise, accept. Because otherwise we end up justifying, I guess this is the insecurity, that if I feel insecure in how I'm coping, then I need you to cope the same way. And again, the principle is, I want you to change so that I feel better. I used to have a supervisor in couples therapy years ago who said in most marriages, people, at least one person says, somebody around here has got to grow, and I'll be damned if it'll be me. Okay, so this is tough work. Okay, so back up to number 3, is to question your assumptions about why people voted for their side. Question your assumptions about why people voted for their side. What I have learned, and the research and the surveys support this, but I certainly have learned this over these 7 years, that people often have complex attitudes towards their political leaders, their party leaders, and policies. Complex attitudes. And I'll give you an example just from this last election. In a number of states that are red states, the citizens overwhelmingly elected Republican and conservative Republican candidates from Trump on down, and then voted for referendums on funding preschool and abortion rights that their leaders disapproved of. Complex. And I interviewed just the other day, a Braver Angels leader did an interview with a woman from Missouri, I think it was Missouri, who was describing her own politics and her attitudes towards abortion. And in the first 5 minutes, she was pro-life. In the next 5 minutes, she was pro-choice. And in the first 5 minutes, she was for politicians who want to talk about the importance of fetal life. And the next one, she was saying they go overboard because women need to be making decisions. Whoa. And she was agonizing about how she was going to vote on the referendum. The interview ended before she voted, okay? But it was striking that on the ground, people are often far more complex than what we get from the talking points or the polls. Far more complex. I was telling my wife as we were driving up here a story about the very first Braver Angels workshop where we asked people what their reservations or concerns were about their own side. And this was a month after the 2016 election. Everybody remember that election? Okay. So the Reds were in the middle. And the first line that a young man who was a strong conservative, his first words were, well, Trump is a scumbag. But he voted for him because he thought that Trump's policies on balance outweighed him being a scumbag. And he was very concerned about the other side. And you could just feel the blues go, whoa, okay? This wasn't at that workshop, I'm thinking about another workshop where a concern that Reds have about blues is you see a problem at a government program. And blues goes, no, that program's needed, that program's needed. And one of the blues said, well, we're much better at putting new programs in than evaluating whether they're working and getting rid of ones that are not. We add, we never subtract. And the Reds went, oh, okay. Now this individual is not saying we should get rid of Head Start or anything else, but he was exercising some humility about his side. In fact, in our what we call Red-Blue workshop, we start with asking each group, red and blue, to come up with separate rooms, the top 4 or 5 false, negative, exaggerated stereotypes that people have of their side. What do people think of us as blues or reds that is false, exaggerated? And then with the guidance of a moderator, they go through each of those, and first is correct the stereotypes. So for reds, the first one always is racist. They think we're racist. They think we're anti-immigrant. They think we're anti-woman. They think we are anti-science Bible thumpers. Okay? And we encourage people to just say it. What do they think of you? For reds, for blues, top of the list almost always is arrogant and elitist. Okay? Another went into big government for its own sake, unpatriotic, baby killers. Okay? And then for each of those, ask people to correct the stereotype. If you feel this is not true of everybody in your side, it's a stereotype, say what's true instead. And then the second question is there a kernel of truth in it? Is there a kernel of truth in it? And we help people confront that, like what makes you wince about your own side? What makes you wince? And can you own up to it? So I remember a red group once, racist. No, we believe in the equal worth and dignity of all people. This is precious to us. Kernel of truth, there are racists in our midst, and it's troubling that they're attracted to our side. Deeply troubling. Okay? And the blues almost always cop to being arrogant and elitist. Okay? And I talked about the big government one. So when people come back from that, they report out the stereotypes and the correction and then the kernel of truth. What happens in these workshops is, particularly when people can land the humility factor, like it's not just my side's perfect, yours is terrible. What happens is people see each other as more complicated and more differences among themselves. So I remember a workshop where there was a guy who was the chair of the county Libertarian Party. So he was red, but strongly libertarian, government, very limited government. And he was sitting next to a fellow conservative, a red, her issue was abortion and pro-life. And I remember she said, well, we have to keep funding the WIC program, which is the infant maternal program. That's just crucial. And the guy went, what? And it was interesting. I was moderating. I never let people do that to each other across parties. I mean, that would just lead to a meltdown. But I let him do it. Like, what? This big government program? And she said, yes, because we want mothers to feel like they could feed their babies. And then they may want to choose to have their baby. That was a sharp division within the same side. We have blues who talk about how on their side, the way it's gotten is there can be, I'm thinking several people said this, that if there can 20 policies that are blue liberal policies, and you may agree on 19 of them, and if you don't agree on the 20th, you can be ostracized. So I remember this was a rabbi saying she was thoroughly liberal, and in terms of abortion, she was against it. She was pro-life. I don't know what she meant in terms of public policy, but that was her moral stance. And she said, I can't say that. I can't say that in liberal circles because I would be ostracized. But I'm going through some examples of showing the complexity on both sides. I was just at a meeting the other day with a project I'm involved in Minneapolis with police officers and black men from the community. And one of the white officers told me, he said he wished that in the presidential election there was a none of the above category that he would have checked. Now, he didn't say, but I suspect that he voted for Trump. A number of the white officers did. And I suspect I could follow up with him. We have a good relationship. That on balance, the defund the police and all of the attacks from the left have left a scar, and that he would, I'm guessing, that he might have voted for Trump. But can you see the complexity there? The complexity of how people think and vote. So questioning our assumptions, because this is what leads to these relationship dramas, in my opinion. The two things that lead to it. One is that I can't regulate emotionally without you changing. And the second is this comment I heard the other night on TV with the interviewer interviewing a psychiatrist. It was a blue-leaning TV station saying, "What do you think if Trump stands against everything you believe in terms of human values and personal dignity and health and democracy, your fundamental values, and you have relatives who voted for him, why would you not cut them off?" And the psychiatrist said, "You're right." She didn't say completely cut off, but if they stand for everything different from you, then maybe you need to give yourself some time and not see them on Thanksgiving. And so that's the idea that anybody who voted their way has signed up for everything, signed up for the entire agenda with no ifs, ands, or buts. And now, even in my view, even if they're a loved one, even if they did, I would still go to Thanksgiving. But that's the second category, is the lack of complexity that we assign to people in our lives around their votes. We think they line up with what the polls say or what the politicians say. And the reality is, and polls, attitude polls. So the young woman I described, I think she probably would check an attitude poll as pro-life. But think about that interview. Think about the complexity for her, that she has a strong feeling, but she doesn't want to necessarily force other women to have her feelings on this, right? But depending on what day of the week it was, she might have said pro-life. Or she might say she's pro-choice if she thought the pro-choice people took fetal life more seriously. You get all that? And so then you get the survey, and then if the survey is outrageous enough, your favorite media outlet will put it up there. That 40% of Americans say they don't believe in democracy. Well, what was the question? And how were they feeling that day? And what did they think of democracy? But what I'm saying is, and I certainly have experienced this in my life, another factoid, another outrageous, an alarming poll, or an outrageous statement by somebody from the party that you're not in, an outrageous statement that then it's possible to then say, they all think that way. They all think that way. Whereas one's own side, you can go, well, that was pretty outrageous, but that person's an outlier. I remember having a conversation with somebody who differed from me politically, and we have really good dialogues. And what I was struck with is that the people on my side who I consider kind of fringe, he saw as organically connected, like almost close to the heart. In other words, not crazies, not fringe, but one step outside of the mainstream. When I pointed out some of his folks, he said, well, they're crazies. They're just outliers. They're not one of us. Can you see the tendency is to see people who are extreme and say outrageous things on the other side to be reflecting something that is close to the core, whereas somebody on one's own side, you have this sort of more, well, we don't pay attention to them. So the point is aiming for complexity, assuming complexity on the part of loved ones without assuming you know why they voted. Because otherwise we are angry at a stereotype, not a living person who we care for. So connected to this then is I recommend consciously working outside of just a particular relationship, work on understanding how people who differ from you politically see themselves and why they voted the way they did. So not just an individual, but a whole group. And here's the trick. If you can't explain to somebody your understanding of why they voted the way they did in a way that they say, yes, you got it, then you have not understood them. You have not understood them. So when I was having the teasing around about teaching you about how political, about entitlement or so on, the mother, the blue mother, who happened to be a therapist, talked about her effort to understand her 20-year-old son who voted for Trump. She was using blue language with compassion to explain why he did this. Well, he's a male, and males have had privilege in this country, and of course it's threatening when groups come along and assert, their rights and their claims to the American dream. Of course it's going to be hard. And I said to her, can I offer you some input there? That's a little therapist trick. They always say yes. That I said, I doubt that he would explain his vote in those terms. That's an outsider's explanation. It's an outsider's explanation. And it's more sociological. I'm not saying at some sociological level we don't vote different ways by our identity groups and so on. I'm not against that at all. But this is a flesh and blood individual, and when people get told that they are thinking and voting the way they do based on their sociological category, they hate it. They hate it for good reason, because it takes away their individuality. But what she was doing, and a good heart, she was trying to have compassion for her son who voted in a way she had trouble understanding. And so she employed these kind of evaluative categories. He's kind of blind. That's really what that is. He's blind to his real reasons. Okay? And his real reasons, obviously I didn't talk to him, but if I asked him, if I interviewed him with curiosity about his vote, I guarantee you it would be far more complicated and then an external. So what I told her was, that was a blue, this was not in therapy, by the way, this was a workshop, but I told her that was a blue analysis of why her son voted the way he did, and that I had, without knowing him, I had a lot of confidence that he would not use those terms. It would be like a red saying, well, why do the blues, because blues don't go to church as much, so blues have abandoned core values. And of course they're going to vote for candidates who are for breaking the long-held norms of our country. Okay? Of course they're going to go that direction because they become untethered from religion and faith. And then they chase identity politics. So I would suspect not many blues in this room would say, oh yeah, that does it? Yeah, oh, thank you for that insight. That's why I vote for a Democrat. But can you see in a red circle with enough people saying that, just like in blue circles with enough people doing their put-downs, their oversimplifications, that's your answer. And then you have a blue relative who doesn't go to church anymore or goes to the wrong one, and they're voting for every liberal cause, and then you bring that attitude towards them. And then maybe you try to convert them back, and all kinds of things happen. So this is what I decided to do when I got involved in Forever Angels. I decided to read more widely than I ever had before, to read magazines that I don't think the postal worker ever sees going to the same mailbox. Thoughtful ones, reading columnists, journalists, thoughtful journalists who have multiple perspectives, And read them, this is for me, this is what I did. Read them not to refute them, but read them to say, what's the heart of what they're saying here? For me, what's the best of liberalism and what's the best of conservatism and what's the legitimate critique that each side needs to really think about from the other side? Instead of, I got my side, I'm going to read my people, I'm going to read your people for the weaknesses in their argument. And then or my big transcendent reasons why you're doing it. So this for me is the journey I've been on. It may be too soon to be thinking about this, for any individual, but this is what has helped me have some kind of peace with where we are. Even though I can put on my partisan hat and I can deliver you it. I mean, I can deliver that. But when I put on my other hat, my Brave Angel hat, my citizen hat, I can also explain the other side. And now I'm going to talk about something I only came to in the last 6 months. So I've been at this for 6.5 years. And only in the last 6 months have I come to grips with this. That each side has fears, grave fears about the other, and we tend to dismiss the fears of the other side. So people who are enthusiastic about Trump, when they hear the fears of losing our democracy, the fears of what somebody, what a narcissist will do, just enrich himself, trample over everybody's rights, what many Reds say is, you're exaggerating, you're talking in a partisan way. I've heard that song before. He didn't do it to the country his first term, he's not going to do it this term. And then you say, but he didn't have guardrails. And then you're off to the races. But the tendency to not take seriously, and it's threatening, it's hard, because if you're saying he's going to ruin our democracy, I voted for him, what do I do with myself here, right? So I almost have to dismiss that. Almost have to dismiss that. It's very hard not to. But I think that in my Brave Angels work, I've learned that Reds understand Blues' fears more than Blues understand Reds' fears of Blues. Okay? Yeah, and there's research to support that. And so the Reds, many Reds, have a deep and abiding fear that if Harris were to have won, and then you have Democratic control of the presidency and the Senate, and then eventually the Supreme Court, over time, that the government would become so strong, so powerful, that it would be a trifecta of power that would threaten the individual freedoms of Americans. Because from a Red perspective, Blues have won the culture wars. We have gay marriage. We have schools trying to adjust to trans kids. We have what used to be called premarital sex. There was premarital, and then marital, and then affairs. That's what you had. Okay. 90% of people get married nowadays have sex before they get married. I'm old enough to remember when that was. Talk about cohabitation. Raise your hand if you remember living in sin as something, okay? Living in sin. So think about how fast this has gone. When I began my graduate studies in the early 70s, homosexuality was a diagnostic category, a mental health diagnosis. It was a pathology. And we learned that it's from overbearing mothers and weak fathers. That was the psychoanalytic thing, okay? We studied, it was very hard to treat. And by the way, that was all men because who thought about women's sexuality anyway? I mean, it's just like, the heck is that? And then what was it, 6 years ago or something? The Supreme Court of the United States finished the job of legalizing gay marriage. And marriage is our top societal recognition of a relationship because all these rights and responsibilities come with it. That happened in terms of history and of change in culture with breathtaking speed. Breathtaking speed. And so many other cultural changes, and I know blues focus on, well, the Supreme Court, what the Supreme Court did with abortion and the fights about transition. I mean, there's still skirmishes. But from a red point of view, and I don't think it's wrong, is that that we have a much more liberal, look at pornography. It's everywhere and pretty well accepted. Okay? So from a red, particularly a religious conservative perspective, this is a massive change, not for the best. And then you have Hollywood, you have the news media, Fox News aside, but you talk about the elite news media, from a red perspective, it's blue all the way down. So then you have higher education, where I've been in my career. It's completely blue at the level of elite universities. And you could throw a stone on most elite university campuses in a faculty meeting and not hit a conservative faculty member. Okay? So I'm urging you, because I know there's a lot of blues here, to roll take the fear that if you add federal power, because blues are more activist in government, okay, that's part of the blue thing. Let's get on with trying to create opportunity, try to improve the environment. Government is an agent of positive change from a blue perspective. Things can go wrong, but hey, let's get on with it. Red perspective is government can control too much, overregulate, and so on. So imagine then a fear, and I have a fear that voting for Harris could be the beginning of a trend where that part of American society becomes thoroughly blue. And you have threats to religious liberty. So what happens then is, so I'm giving you sort of what I've been learning about this, then you have some anecdotes, you have some stories that are true that represent that. So when in the Biden administration, early days of understanding trans kids, somebody in the education department told North Carolina, when they weren't letting kids use the bathroom of their choice, that they could lose their federal funding for education unless they shaped up now. Now, that was rescinded. I mean, it was a terrible thing to be making threats like that when we're just trying to get our minds around this. But that stays. That stays. And there was a minister in Western Canada who gave a sermon against gay marriage from a Christian perspective, and they wrote a letter to the editor of the newspaper basically saying the same thing. He was brought up on charges of hate speech by the local Civil Rights Commission. Now, it was thrown out eventually, but he was fined, and he was ordered not to say that again. So if you are a conservative Christian, whoa. Now, it was thrown out by the courts, so what blues will say was thrown out by the courts. But whoa, they could be coming for my free speech. If you had a blue trifecta in power, that eventually they would say, why are we having tax breaks for churches when they preach hate? That would be an example. I'm not saying any of that would happen, but I'm trying to get you inside real fears, just as people have real fears about Donald Trump and the people he's surrounding himself with. Real fears. Not talking points, real fears. Like wake up in the middle of the night fears. And you got a trans kid, and you have, talking to the president of a local college in the Twin Cities, you have DACA kids, youngsters who are afraid they're going to be ripped away from college and ripped away. I mean, these are real fears. But what I'm saying is, if you're a blue, you have no trouble getting in touch with those and saying they're real. I mean, they're justified. I mean, they are. And for the other side, it's not always a question of whether they're completely justified, whether they're real. And they're not just talking points. They're not just trying to score political points. That people worry about that stuff, okay? And so what I'm suggesting is, for me, one of the ways that I have found, in addition to the emotional coping I've been trying to do, I have found myself being able to find a way through, is that I understand human fears. And that we act from those. And then we sometimes do things, support people, support institutions that we have grave reservations about because we're scared. And so I invite you to think about that. So a couple more things, and then we're going to have some questions. Focus on shared values and hopes for the country and its people. The biggest thing I learned in the first year of Brave Our Angels work, and particularly we got a little money and we rented a bus. And we did a bus tour started in Ohio, went through 11 states and a whole bunch of other places. It was former Speaker of the House John Boehner's old bus. And his bus driver, who was a Tea Party guy, and who came around as we went on the tour. And so we went from town to town. People put us up in their houses. We had workshops in smelly gymnasiums. This is a palace here. And American Legion halls with beer smells on the walls. And we're like a grade B basketball team, and going from town to town on a bus, but doing workshops over and over. So it was like a saturation of being around people who were reds and blues. And the big thing I realized was that there's a difference between policy differences and fundamental value differences, and that I was confusing those. If you were against affirmative action and I was for it, let's say, then I could assume that you do not want equal opportunity. What I realized was affirmative action is a set of policies that started in the mid-'60s. It's not the end, it's not the value, it's not the goal, it's a means. It's a means. Policies are means. So I might think that we need a lot more funding for private schools, religious schools. We need to give a lot more parent choice. I think that if the teachers' unions control too much of the agenda in schools and it's hurting kids' education, I want to diversify all of this. And you believe that that's going to harm public education, then you can think that I don't give a rip about public education and about children, because my policy, you believe, is going to undermine public schools. Can you see what happens then? That we then occupy different moral universes, because I care about children and you don't, because we differ on the policy. And what I learned, and this comes out of Brave Our Angels workshops all the time, that we're not so far apart on our fundamental goals and aspirations. We want our children to grow up healthy and be well educated. We want people to have good health care in this country. We want security. So this project I've been working in Minneapolis, in Police and Black Men Project, the big breakthrough was when everybody realized everyone wants safe communities. Safe communities are good for everybody, including the police. So how do we get there? As opposed to, we're going to start out by reforming you, because you're screwing up, okay? And we need efforts to reform, I'm not arguing against that. But it's not a big enough goal. It's not a big enough goal, because when you have a big enough goal, everybody has a part. Everybody has a part in safe communities. Everybody has a part in raising educated children. So that, for me then, I'm recommending that you not assume policy differences equate to differences in fundamental values and hopes for the nation. They usually don't. There are not many people who wake up in the morning and say, how do I undermine the health and welfare of our children today? Even though they may have strong differences on how to get there. So that, for me, keeps me connected to people I know who differ from me, because we're probably not going to resolve the policy differences, but we can have common hopes and aspirations. And then a couple more points. Try humility. Try a little humility on predictions about the future. Because some of what I've realized more recently than ever before is that so many of our arguments, including among people who fundamentally agree, is about predictions. What's going to happen now? What we're seeing in the Trump administration is the appointments, okay? That's coming. What is going to happen? Who knows exactly what's going to happen? And we get into these, I think, when we lack humility about the unpredictable future, the uncertainties, the contingencies, the good or bad luck. I mean, just think about how the world, if the assassination attempt had succeeded. Would the world have been better or worse? Who could tell me that? Okay, there are a lot of blues who thought, well, who knows? I lived through John Kennedy's assassination, like, whoa. So anybody, I'm suggesting, I'm saying this dogmatically with no humility whatsoever. If you think you know the future, you're wrong. So how do you like that? I just thought about it. It's kind of a contradiction, but what the heck. It's been helpful to me that I might be mostly right, mostly wrong, or completely wrong about what's going to happen. And that helps me not panic. And so I quoted the great philosopher Yogi Berra. It's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. And then the last thing is to decide if you want to be a bridge builder. I decided when Brave Angels got started that was going to be my vocation in this work. I'm better suited for it based on my skill set than to be a demonstrator on the street, although that's needed as well, I'm sure. I said this to a group of high school students, juniors and seniors, 400 of them. Talk about a tough environment. It was in the gymnasium, and they were spread out over about 100 yards, so you're a lot easier in that group. Isn't that a compliment to pay you? But part of what I said to them is that we have left them a mess. We have left them more bridge burners per capita than bridge builders, and that I'm hoping their generation can decide to be bridge builders. So I think at our own personal level, we can either work at the differences, or we can try to build some bridges while still having our partisan hat. Braver Angels is never about changing people's minds around issues or politicians, ever. We're trying to change each other's minds about each other so that we could differ as fellow citizens in this country and not as enemies. That's what we're about. We're not talking about everybody should come to the middle, everybody be centrist. That'd be fine, do whatever you want. But it's how we regard each other when we differ. So, and for help with that, Braver Angels, $12 a year to join. Scholarships available if you can't afford that. We have far more members per capita in Minnesota than any other state. We are even close in raw numbers to California. So we have these great institutions like MPR. I want to tell you about we have this Reduce the Rancor project here that Brave Angels is doing. And one of those projects is Macalester College and the University of Northwestern. The University of Northwestern is a Bible college in Roseville. It's the most conservative college in the state. Macalester is way up there in terms of liberal. And we have a group of 6 students from each school meeting every other week, having a meal together, and getting to know each other beyond the differences. And the 2 presidents join in. 2 presidents join in. And we did an exercise recently where we asked this question that we like to ask in some of our workshops. What life experiences have influenced your values and beliefs about public policy and public service? What life experiences have influenced your values and beliefs about public policy and public services? The public good, excuse me. Public policy and the public good. And everybody got 4 minutes. You couldn't tell who was a red or who was a blue as they talked about their family experiences, their experiences of loss, of illness, of inspiration, and why they want to make the world different. So the young people did it, and then the next week, the presidents and their 2 faculty, they did the same thing. And it was really quite powerful. So I want to now take a moment for you to reflect on what we've talked about, and then I'm going to invite some questions. So just take a few breaths. There's a lot coming your way. And I invite you to do actually one of 2 things, either a question or a comment about whether something I talked about was useful or meaningful to you. So one of the 2, something that was meaningful, useful, or a question. So take a moment and breathe here a little bit. Okay, so who'd like to go first? And this part, there will be some microphones here. So yes, just hold off till the microphone comes up.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. I don't know if this is a hard question or not. In my mind, it's a hard question, so I'm sorry.
That's a Minnesotan thing. And New York would have just said, I'm throwing this up at you.
Okay. You talked about how it's hard to be married to a braver angel.
Yeah.
It's also really hard to be a braver angel and be involved in politics because there's this loyalty sort of thing that you talked a little bit about, right?
Right, yeah.
For instance, we just had a Chick-fil-A that opened in Duluth. Today is the grand opening.
Yeah.
And even in, political circles, like that's a little bit of a litmus test. Like, are you going to go to Chick-fil-A?
Yeah, the Blues don't like
go to
Chick-fil-A, right.
So I'm just curious if you have some advice on how to navigate that as to be involved in politics.
Yeah, that was a hard
be
question.
a braver angel.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move on to the next. Does somebody have a soft question? So thank you. So thank you for that. If you think about the last thing I said, it's the attitudes towards each other. It's not the policies. Okay? And so we've had political leaders who have been supportive and involved in a number of ways. And it's the respect for people who differ. And so with Chick-fil-A, and you may know they came out with some stuff against gay marriage some years ago, it would be saying, I don't support the company based on those values, without saying people who go there are homophobic, or that the particular leaders are, disgusting people. So it would be that. It gives me a chance to say we did with Representative Dean Phillips, in 3rd District. He reached out to Braver Angels, and we did 10 red-blue workshops with him and his constituents, like 6 reds, 6 blues, around topics that they brought up, where people answered that life experiences question, where are you in immigration, healthcare, and tie it to a personal experience. And he joined the group and talked like everybody else. And I know that for him, I'm not trying to make a partisan statement here, but I know that he believes that you can be in politics and not demonize people. Yeah. So somebody else? Yes. Just wait. Oh, no, but they need it. They need it. Yeah, no, you got a good voice, but you can't project to the Twin Cities.
I have a simple question.
Oh, good, unlike yours.
What about truth? The premise of your entire...
Yeah.
I could walk away from this speech tonight based on truth.
Yeah.
Because you said things like, look for a kernel of truth in the story.
Yeah.
And he said this and she said that.
Right.
And who do you believe?
Yeah.
I believe, personally, that all media are biased to some degree, even MPR.
Right.
I believe they're biased to some degree.
Sure.
Who do you believe?
So you asked me what is truth?
Yes.
What am I, Pontius Pilate?
I rest my case.
So let me riff off that. Thank you. Thank you for that. Because often what we mean when we say truth is facts. Okay? And so here's my riff on that. That in a world, well, 2 things. One is, most of us do not have direct access to policy-relevant facts. If you're not a climate scientist, you don't have direct access to that. If you don't study immigration, you don't have direct. That policy-relevant facts are based on who we trust, authorities and others that we trust or don't trust. Okay? Even in my area, family studies, there's like 1 or 2 areas that I am truly an expert, like I know all of the research on it. Beyond that, I don't. So the problem then is, I see it, we don't trust the same sources. We used to trust the public health sources. We don't trust them anymore, okay? So when we have a pandemic, I used to say, hey, you know what we need is a good pandemic, to bring us together. Not that right? Nah, because we don't trust. So we don't have agreement on facts, which I'm saying are truth, because we don't trust the same sources of those. And you mentioned the media. There's so little trust, right above used cars salespeople, right? No offense to anybody who said. So I'm with you on that, and it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem, but it's not a problem that some of us have the facts and others don't. You weren't saying that. But I can tell you what a lot of blues do is, when a lot of blues, you were not doing this, but what a lot of blues do, how do you talk to somebody who's not doesn't know the facts? Well, what they're saying is, I have the facts and they don't. They're in ignorance and I'm in knowledge. And what I'm saying is, it's much more fundamental than that because we don't agree on the sources of policy relevant facts. It's a major, I'm glad you brought it up because it's a major issue. Major issue. Somebody else.
My name is Linda Deneen. I don't have a question. I just wanted to say of all the things you said tonight, the one that really stuck for me was understanding other people's fears. And that was really powerful. I think we should all practice.
Yeah, and why was that powerful for you in particular?
I know what my fears are, and I feel like I know what my side's fears are, but I don't have a clue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was true for me for a very long time. When you can name people's fears, they feel heard, then you can go on and talk. Yeah, thank you. So questions or take-homes? Yeah, go for it.
Lori.
Yeah.
And I just started reading a newsletter a couple weeks ago called The Tangle.
Okay.
And
Tangle.
I have found that to be incredibly helpful.
Yeah, so tell us what it does.
So it's an online, I get it in the email, but it lists a viewpoint, and it'll give resources from the left, resources from the right, and then a non-biased viewpoint. And I have found it to be really helpful in trying to understand other people's viewpoints.
And there are some others like that. The Tangle is this, and there's some others where you get left, right, and center. MPR has a show on Fridays that's left, right, and center. And the thing is, if you can stretch from your own preconceptions, if you can take it in, John Wood Jr., who's one of our leaders, talks about patriotic empathy. Okay? The task of citizen, if you want to be a bridge builder, is to try to understand for the sake of our country. So thank you. Yep.
The word fears, I think, can be a problem.
Your name, they want your name.
My name is Mary.
Yeah.
And I think the word, I want to be careful with saying that I understand someone else's fears because they may not see it as a fear. They may see it as their thinking. And I'm not afraid. This is what I think is right. So don't tell me I'm afraid.
Sure. Thank you. I'm not saying what you should say to somebody. I'm saying what it's important for me to think in my own mind so that I can understand. Because you're right. If somebody doesn't want to talk about their feelings, they want to talk about the facts, well, that's okay. They don't have to share their feelings. But it's important for me to understand that there's often there's behind, this is Braver Angel's truism, behind every powerful political viewpoint there's a story. If somebody has a strong conviction of something, there's a story behind it. And often the story has some fear in it, has some loss in it, has something. And if you can get to the story, Monica Guzman, as one of our leaders, has a great book called I Never Thought of It That Way. And it's about curiosity. If you wanted to give somebody a gift who differed from you politically, just have coffee with them. And don't share your own view. Just ask them about their own. And say, why is this important to you? And what's the story? And don't utter a single contradiction. even if asked. I mean, I did that for a Brave Angels colleague. I wanted to know more. This was where I got to the fear part. And then we went on for some time. He said, well, now I need to ask you. And I said, that can be later. I really, really learned a lot. Yep, go for it. Your name?
My name is Sue Okerstrom.
Okay.
And I want to, it really put things together when you said about understanding other people's fears. Because I was a door knocker for Hillary Clinton. Mm-hmm. And I went to the wrong address. I thought, you know, this was one of the Democratic, and I went walking up, and this guy comes out, and he sees the clipboard, and he said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm looking for 1223, whatever. Oh, that's over there. What are you doing? I said, well, we're trying to get out the vote for Hillary Clinton. Well, I just voted for Trump. I said, okay, well, that's your right. I'm not trying to change your vote. I'm just looking to get out our side. Well, what do you think about abortion? And so we ended up having this discussion, and I said, well, this is what I think. And, well, what about Jesus? Jesus saved my marriage. And I said, well, I'm really happy that that worked out for you.
Good for you.
You know, I'm a Unitarian, and I think it's important that everybody does what's right for themselves. And we had this long discussion,
beautiful.
And he said, I have sinned against Democrats. I didn't realize, you know, and then he said, this was just wonderful talking to you. I don't know why we can't talk about these things. And he shook my hand.
That's a beautiful story. That's a beautiful story. Thank you. That deserves a little applause here, doesn't it? Yes. Yeah. And you hung in there and were respectful and listened and didn't try to change his mind. But his mind changed. And yours did maybe a little bit too. And maybe all of ours. Okay, beautiful. Yeah.
My name is Steve Gregorich. I'm a local guy. I think sometimes I can bridge the gap with the red and the white conundrum, is this idea of, it's not about what I say or what my agenda is or what about I want to convey to you or confirm in you that you should believe in me, but it's this idea of being, of having attitude and to present the conversation in such a way that it isn't heated, that I can somehow, if I can speak more slowly and I can deliver more gently, I'm not trying to force a solution.
Yeah, beautiful.
And therefore it opens up more freedom for either of us to convey our feelings about what we believe. I heard one person say some time back that fear is future events appearing real, and I like that. I like that that synonym of what FEAR is, and I don't have much belief in wanting to fear what has not arrived because I'm not God. Anyway, thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, your point about the attitude, if I can stay calm, I always say escalation involves two people going up. You cannot be involved in an escalating conversation unless you participate. Somebody might get all worked up, but it's not an escalation unless you, and by the way, if you ever hear yourself saying yes, but, you're in it. You're in it, just move up. So thank you for that.
Hello, I'm Katya Gordon from Two Harbors, and I've really enjoyed this. I have a comment that I'd love you to comment on. A couple years after Braver Angels started, I got involved. So I've been doing kind of the same thing as you for years. I've been really widened what I listen to and read, and really have had my eyes open dramatically over the years. But I found a couple things, and one is that it's easy enough to say, become a good listener, but it's actually quite hard today to find people who will trust you enough that they will share with you if you're different from them. And I feel like the first step is often, I mean, is to go, if you really are curious, you got to go places where other people are, even if it's, a podcast of people. I think podcasts are often where people are speaking to people like them, and so their defenses are down. They're truly speaking in a trusting way, and you can learn a lot with stuff like that. But as my views really started to change, I did find that my tolerance for my own sort of tribe becomes really different. And when I hear people being outraged, I really want to say, if you hear, how could they vote for? I will say, do you really want to know? Are you curious, or you just want to be outraged? And usually people just want to be outraged. They actually are not.
Do you say that?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I say, especially to loved ones, where I'm a little braver, I say, if you want to know, there's a really good article. It's very thoughtful. I actually understand that view.
And what reaction do you get back?
It's been really hard, to be honest.
Okay, sure.
People, I feel like we are very unaware of how high our defenses are around this, and how we really are not necessarily curious. We enjoy our outrage. Yeah. And I have found it quite hard to speak even just narrowly off the blue path if I'm a blue. The moral condemnation you get is and it's ironic to me, because in a blue world, often people think of reds as this super condemner, judgmental, and I just find it to be the opposite often.
Okay.
And I think that's something that we need to really look at.
So you want my reflection on that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. This is one of the risks of seeing the limitations of one's own side, because I know red braver angels in the same fix. Come on, they're not all this way. They're not demons, right? And so and I fall into that trap, so I'll say two things. One is, emotionally, if somebody says, how in the world could somebody possibly, they're not really asking a question. Now, you'd think I, as a marriage and family therapist, would have figured that out a long time ago. But it took me a number of years with my own wife to understand that's not a question that the expert is supposed to answer. Okay? It's actually, people are ventilating at that point, and they have every right to do it. So what I've learned is to try to use my braver angel skill with people on my own side. To be curious about where people are coming from, to let them tell their story. And then when there's an opening, and this is something that I've done, it's a tip that I say, I start with where I agree. And then I say, if I put my braver angel's hat on now, this is how I think about it. And there are other times that my braver angel's hat is not on, and I can be, partisan or whatever. But so I do I don't challenge their thinking. I try and something to agree with, and then I say, just strictly I statement, which is one of the things we teach in our workshops. This is what I have experienced, that not all reds or not all blues are like that. This is what I've experienced, that I think it's more complicated. And I say it like you were saying, so calm attitude, right? And then what I've learned is this actually becomes influential over time. I had a meeting I did once a month, and somebody else in the meeting, we would talk in the parking lot afterwards, and she was, really polarized and kind of like braver angels, but need to fight. So we talked. It took 8 months until it got really, really cold. The conversations were quicker in the parking lot. But what I learned was that she was a very open-minded person. I really liked her. She thought about our conversation each time and then gradually shifted away from such a condemning attitude and told me that. But it wasn't just from one conversation. And it was with me giving her the respect that she had every right to be upset. And then here's where I'm coming from. That's what I've learned. It's very hard not to be judgmental and moralistic in life in general, including when you've seen the light. I've seen the light about to reach across the divide and save America, and you have not. But maybe I could get you there, and people hate that. I don't know why, but they do. Okay, what's the next one? Go for it, yeah.
So my name's Jen Schultz, and I'm very glad that you're here tonight with our community. I just came off a congressional campaign, and I just want to tell a quick story about what I've observed. And there's a lot of fear, and people are afraid to talk to the other side.
Yeah.
I was in a small town, and there was a blue office and a red office across the street. And the blues were having an event, and the reds knew about it, and they were out waving signs and on a public street. I got there, and all the blues were hiding in the office, and they weren't out with their signs and flags. And so I crossed the street, and I talked to all the people on the red side. And the people in the blue office were afraid for me to go over there and just talk.
Yeah.
And I wanted to show leadership, like it is okay to communicate with each other. And when I got back, everyone of the blue office came out, and everything was civil. There was no angry words exchanged or anything. It was very civil. They were just waving signs to folks driving by. But I think in other areas that I visited, people were afraid to come to public events and be photographed because of the fear of what people and their neighbors or their community or even their spouse would think of them. So the work you're doing is really important. And I hope that it's very intentional to intentionally bring people together that are afraid to talk to one another. And we probably need a lot more groups than Braver Angels doing this work, in my experience, because these communities are so polarized and fearful that they just shut down. And what I'm afraid after this election that people are going to hibernate. And I don't want them to binge watch shows. I do really want them to be engaged, because we have a lot of work to do in this country to strengthen our democracy. So I'm grateful you're here, and I've observed a lot of issues that we have to resolve as a country. And I am fearful of what the future holds, and I think a lot of people are, and they're looking for leaders for answers and how to engage. So I hope people can come together and engage across the aisle, because I think we need to show that of how it's done.
Yeah, thank you. And you showed that leadership by walking across the street. Thank you. Yes.
Well, it's really hard to follow that, but my name...
Yeah, make it good, though.
But my name is Jason. I'm actually new here in Duluth, splitting time between D.C. and here. So actually I was in D.C. just like a week ago. And so seeing Braver Angels is a breath of fresh air coming from D.C. And we certainly need more of these types of forums back east as well. So I really just want to commend this discussion. It's really fantastic to be a part of this. Truth be told, I was just looking for something to do tonight, and I happened to see this advertised, and so it looked
and there were
interesting
cookies.
To me. But I do want to come back to one question that you fielded earlier, because I was somewhat, honestly, a little dissatisfied with your answer. It's about the sort of the truth and facts. And I think it's really, speaking from personal experience, it's really hard for me to sort of have that empathy with folks who have beliefs that are sort of founded on like conspiracy theories or misinformation.
Sure.
So I thought maybe you could sort of pull that thread a little bit more and how we could gain that empathy towards these beliefs that are sometimes really clearly founded on untruths.
Sure. No, absolutely. Yeah. It's for me. It's a matter of understanding where that comes from, what conspiracy theories come from, and who's attracted to them, and who has solace in them. And for me, there's always been these beliefs that people have, right? The danger for me is when they become conspiracies that people believe are facts that we should base policy on, that we should involve law enforcement, that we should base policy on. And so that's where in the political domain, those have to be confronted by leaders, mostly going back to leadership, right, on their own side. Because people will more apt to trust somebody on their own side who says, you remember John McCain, that famous town hall, when somebody was condemning Obama as some sort of terrorist Muslim? He said, no, ma'am, he's a patriotic American. He and I just happen to have some fundamental disagreements. That's leadership. And some of the fear we're talking about, and the fear of being ostracized by your own party. So when they get into policy relevant things, it has to be challenged at that level. Now, at the level of the interpersonal, I was just talking to somebody the other day, a colleague of mine who called me. Her mother's just so far out, she cannot stop talking about conspiracy stuff when they're together. And I'm encouraging her, based on what she told me, to see her mother as mentally ill in that case, and to have compassion for her, set some limits, but not try to talk her out of it. So 2 levels. One is how we deal with people in our lives, and then the other is when it moves into, there are people who believe in the flat earth. God love them. But if you want to destroy our space program, you're entitled to that, but not here, and it has to be led by people who they otherwise trust. Who can say, no, let's slow down on this one. So thank you for bringing that back. Yeah. So I think we should be wrapping up pretty. Sure, a good one. This guy has been making eye contact the whole time. Not that the others weren't good, by the way. There's some very good questions out there. So, yes, go for it.
All right. So I have 2. I'll keep one because one's just kind of for me personally. I can talk, but. When you are trying to be a bravery angel and you seem to be overwhelmed, that you just, in lack of better words, to say you give a dang is broken. And how do you continue? How do you find the sauce to continue on when you feel like you're overwhelmed, you can't go further anymore, you just want to give up?
That's a good one. I'll say. Yeah. Are you asking for yourself? No? I mean, just, for your... So, thank you. For me, I feel emotional with this. I love my country. I got to keep at it. Thank you. That was a setup, by the way. Show a little. It's always good to show a little emotion at the end, and you get the crowd with you. So I want to, as we wind down, I want to invite John Walforth, who is a local Braver Angels leader, to come up. His red counterpart could not make it tonight. All of our Braver Angels leadership is half red, half blue. And you have a really strong chapter. We call them alliances here. So a few words.
And our red leader did show up at the last minute. You didn't get that information. And she asked that hard question at the beginning. And her husband asked the good questions. So, and that is why I love this red, blue at the top thing. And one thing Bill didn't mention is if you show up, which we've had events at, 4 events at Bent Paddle and a couple events at University of Wisconsin. So we're actually having workshops now. You don't have to say, I'm exactly this or exactly that. I mean, as you mentioned, we find out everybody is purple or white or something. So please come with whatever you have. And that has been really my great joy to get to know people in this last year and work with all these folks. And drink some beer at Bent Paddle. And I'm sorry I don't have a flyer and a bunch of dates. So Bent Paddle, University of Wisconsin, Braver Angels, those are the things to Google and you'll find us. Yes, the 21st is the next workshop at UWS, so that one should Google pretty easy if you're interested. And December 8th at Bent Paddle. And did you want to add something, Amber? Sorry, I didn't say you were going to come up here, so.
I mean, if they're going to give me a microphone, I should probably use it, right? This is so exciting to see this room full of people. You know, we sometimes have waxing and waning interest. So I would just second that encouragement to please come and join us for these other Braver Angels events. This only has an impact in our community if we have a groundswell of people working together. So please stay involved and come and join us.
Thank you. Applause for that. Just 1 second. So I like to end events like this, and then we'll hear from Catherine for the goodbyes. But I think with your question, I can't help but think about Abraham Lincoln and these words that he said in his first inaugural address just before the Civil War. And so he knew it was coming, and this is about hope. Okay? So he said, "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union. When touched again, assuredly they will be by the better angels of our nature." Thank you for having me.
So I've been doing enough of these now where I always like to share my favorite Braver Angels wisdom from the night. And I think tonight it was hearing about fear and how we have our own kind of mental hierarchy of what fear means to us. And we often don't take other people's fears seriously. And just as journalists, you know, I think that that's a really important lesson too. We're out talking to people all the time who have life experiences that make absolutely no sense to us. And our job is to empathize and not make them feel different or bad for what they fear or what they hope. So thank you for that, Bill, and it was nice to hear that in the room. So a couple of housekeeping items. On the way out, there are stickers that say Talking Sense, and on those stickers, there's a QR code, and if you access that QR code, you're gonna find 2 things. First is a link to our Talking Sense landing page at mprnews.org. That's where you can find every story, 40+ stories we've done this year. Every live event we've done around the state, all of them are a little different, so you can learn something by watching each of them. And then you can also it also links to the Braver Angels page where I believe they can find more information about the Duluth chapter if you kind of dig a little bit and look for chapter information. And the final thing is that we have a camera set up back there. Lorna, my editor, is manning it, and if you want to share about how you've been feeling or what you're concerned about or what you might have learned tonight, we would love to do a short video with you. Not required, but we'd love to hear from you anyway. So thank you so much for coming.